Get ready to get through the most challenging part of the writing process, because today we're going to talk about 10 tips for navigating the middle of your story. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of Story Made Simple, and welcome to my writing channel. A bunch of my subscribers have been asking for this video, and I'm not the least bit surprised, because whether you're a newbie or a veteran, typically the hardest part of the writing process is going to be the middle. By comparison, the beginnings and the endings, those are pretty straightforward, but the middle is where things get confusing. And today I've got 10 tips for you that'll help you navigate the process. Some of these are big picture strategies, while others are more focused, but either way, they're going to help you survive. First tip is what I call bridge theory. This means that you want to know your story's beginning and ending before you focus on the middle of the story. If you know your ending, you know what direction the story has to go in. And if you have a sense of direction, the middle becomes much easier to write. Think about it. The middle is a bridge, and you wouldn't build a bridge unless you knew the two specific points that you were trying to connect. The same idea applies to storytelling. So if you want to make your life easier, have an ending in mind from the get-go. And it doesn't even have to be a detailed ending. It could be a basic, concrete ending, something to strive toward. All you want is something that you can aim for. Also, keep in mind, you don't have to marry yourself to this idea. If you want to change things later, you can. But for now, have a concrete ending in mind that you can strive toward. Second tip is to do something that's called writing the islands. And this is something I picked up from the book Refuse to be Done by Matt Bell. And the idea here is that instead of writing your story in chronological order from start to finish, instead of doing that, write the scenes that excite you the most and write them in any order they come to you. This might sound like a messy approach, but it actually saves a lot of time because it forces you to test out your major scenes and see how they fit within the overall story. Sometimes you'll write one of these scenes and you'll realize that, oh, I need to set things up properly early on, or, oh, I just wrote this scene and now I have to figure out how it's going to pay off later in the story. And it's fun because you can experiment with different things, test out ideas, and then later on you can decide whether or not you want to keep everything. And once you have all these islands, then it's just a matter of finding the right connective tissue to bring everything together. Third tip is the clock. And this comes from Chuck Palahniuk's book, Consider This. And when he talks about the clock, he's talking about something that sets a clear time limit for your story. It could be something like a pregnancy or a countdown or a specific deadline. Whatever it is, it builds suspense by giving us a clear endpoint to worry about. We also get a steady sense of plot progression as the woman is getting closer and closer to having her baby, or as the ticking time bomb is getting closer and closer to zero. This is a great way to manage your audience's expectations as well as the story's pacing. Tip number 4 is to push your protagonist out of their comfort zone. This stage of the story, the middle of your story, is all about testing your main character, seeing what they're made of, challenging them. So at this stage, what you want to do, you want to give them brutal obstacles and brutal dilemmas. And if you do find that your story is starting to sag, that it's starting to get boring, introduce some kind of conflict that really challenges your protagonist. You don't want to take it easy on them here. Instead, pressure them, torture them, and finally destroy them. Speaking of pressure, that brings us to tip number 5, which is to use pinch points. These are two of the most underrated pieces of story structure. The simplest way to explain them is that they are two key moments where villains take action and put pressure on your protagonist. Pinch points occur around the 38% mark and the 62% mark. In other words, pinch point number 1 happens midway through the second quarter of the story, and pinch point number 2 happens midway through the third quarter of the story. Many writers make the mistake of ignoring their villains during these stages, and that can lead to a lack of conflict and suspense. In order to keep your audience engaged, get the villain involved. Even if it means sending out henchmen or preparing for a future attack, have them do something. Make sure they remain active. Tip number 6 is to plan to raise the stakes. When we talk about stakes, we're talking about what a character has to gain as well as what the character has to lose. And as the story progresses, we want those stakes to get higher and higher. More to gain and more to lose. For example, in Star Wars, Luke initially plays a small role by delivering an important message to Obi-Wan. Then he plays a larger role by personally joining the battle against the Empire. Then later on, he risks his life to help Leia, and finally he joins the Death Star attack, where if he fails, the Rebel Alliance will be crushed. Throughout the movie, Luke consistently has more to gain in terms of finding his place in the world, and also more to lose in terms of who will suffer and die if he doesn't succeed. Tip number 7 is to show the ups and downs of character arcs. Arcs are all about growth, and growth is a process. It's not a simple overnight change like, oh, he was selfish and now he's a great guy. No, it's more like he was selfish and someone challenged him to stop being selfish. Then he tried to be a better man, but it didn't stick. And then he found other reasons to improve, but he still struggled. And finally, he made a meaningful choice to prove that he truly changed. The point I'm trying to make is that you can make the middle section of your story far more interesting if you allow your characters to screw up, make mistakes, and suffer through growing pains. These are the fun sections of the story where we get to see characters change little by little, taking steps forward while also taking steps back. And that dynamic where things are up and down and back and forth, that's what keeps the audience engaged, and that's what makes your middle more interesting. Tip number 8, build toward disaster and rebirth. When we think about the middle section of the story, this section will typically end with a scenario where a character suffers their greatest defeat. There's going to be a huge setback, something terrible happens, maybe someone they care about dies, or their dreams are crushed, or whatever it is. But this is going to happen at the end of the middle section. And it's also going to prompt the character to have to regroup, pick themselves up, and come up with a plan to solve the main plot's problem. Now, if you remember, earlier in the video, we talked about how if you know your ending, the middle will become easier to write because you have a clear target to aim for. Likewise, if you know what tragic event will happen at the end of this middle section, the middle as a whole will get easier to write because once again, you're giving yourself direction. You're giving yourself a target to aim for. So think about the worst possible setback that can happen to your character in this particular story, and then set them on the path toward it. Tip number 9 is to use subplots to keep the main plot from getting stale. Now, when we talk about the main plot, we're talking about the central conflict between your protagonist and antagonist. And this is the meat of the story, but we can't always rely on the main plot to carry the story. That's where subplots come in. They give us a breather from the main plot while also deepening the characters by showing characters and their different relationships with maybe friends, romantic partners, mentors, whoever it is. One of the great things about subplots is that they contribute a different energy to the story. So if you're writing a story with an intense main plot and it's action, 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 but it's starting to lose its impact, it might be time to switch over to a subplot. Not only does this freshen things up, but it also allows us to get more invested in the characters and their relationships, which deepens the overall story. Finally, tip number 10 is to determine how the midpoint will shift your character in a new direction. The midpoint, which occurs at the story's 50% mark, plays a key role in shifting the direction of your overall plot. Usually what happens is a new piece of information comes to light, and the protagonist reacts by using this info to go on the attack against their main opponent. Whatever it is, keep the midpoint in mind as a key moment that raises the stakes and pushes your story toward its conclusion. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what other parts of the writing process frustrate you most? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of any one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Story Made Simple is great if you're a writer. It covers the 8 key elements of storytelling, and it does so in no-nonsense fashion. Also, be sure to check out my other videos. Like, share, and subscribe. Maybe support me on Patreon. And as always, remember to keep on writing.